There's a lot of people that think starting a podcast is buying a camera, microphone, really expensive computer, and basically having a full setup before you even start recording your first podcast. But the more I've looked at Apple's ecosystem lately, the more I've realized something. Apple has basically built a full creator studio on devices that we already own. You could use your iPhone as the camera, your AirPods as the microphone, and your iPad as like the recording hub. And with things like iPadOS 26, Final Cut Camera, and Apple Creator Studio, starting a podcast or a YouTube channel is a lot easier than it used to be. So today I'm gonna build a budget podcast setup starting with just my iPhone, and I'll slowly add more Apple products to build on that setup. And by the end of the video, I wanna have the best possible podcast setup I can using just the Apple products that I already have. A lot of people, probably like myself, never start a podcast or anything because they think they need this super expensive setup. They think you first need the perfect microphone, the perfect camera, perfect desk, and then maybe once all that's done, they'll finally make their first video or podcast. But honestly, that's probably kind of backwards. Because, well, the best setup isn't always the most expensive one. It's mostly just what you can get your hands on. And that's where Apple products are kind of perfect. I mean, I already have an iPhone, an iPad, all sorts of Apple products, and most people have at least an iPhone. And on an iPhone, you can actually record in ProRes, which is really high quality video. If you already have an iPhone, you already have a really good camera. And if you have AirPods, you've got a wireless microphone setup, which is a lot better than it used to be. And the iPad now has Final Cut Pro for iPad, which is great for multicam views and all sorts of podcast-like setups. So instead of asking, what expensive stuff do I need to buy to get started, maybe start thinking, what Apple products do I have and what can I build on that to make the best podcast setup I have? So let's start as simple as possible. Just the iPhone that's probably already in your pocket. And honestly, it's probably where most people should start. If you want to start a podcast today, you could literally put your iPhone on a tripod, open the camera app, and sit near a window, then start recording. That's probably good enough for your first ever episode as long as you're getting it out there. So now you can record straight to an SSD, which makes things so much easier if you have an iPad or computer, which we'll talk about later. You just hit record and start your podcast, and you can edit it later on your iPhone, which is really cool. In fact, iPhones now have this audio mix feature, which lets you change the audio after you shoot the video. That way you can get a little bit better audio quality. You don't want to mess with it too much or else it'll sound really edited, but it's pretty cool that it's there. Then after you've adjusted the audio, maybe get the iMovie app on your iPhone and you can cut it all up and make it a lot more professional looking. Okay, now let's step it up a little bit more with something like AirPods Pros. These have pretty good microphones already. I mean, Apple says they're studio quality mics, whatever that means, but the really good thing is you'd be able to put these in your ear and walk far away from your phone and you'd still get pretty good audio. If you go to Control Center by swiping down on the top right of your iPhone, you can get all sorts of different microphone controls from your AirPods. And in here, you can kind of customize how much sound gets through the AirPods, in case maybe you want it to just hear your voice or if you want it to hear everything around you as well. And you can make it so the AirPods also act as a shutter button. That way, if you're far away from your iPhone, you can just press your AirPods and it'll start recording. But to do this, you'll have to enable it in settings. So you just go to Bluetooth and find your AirPods and click on the information button. Then you scroll down a little bit and you'll see the camera control button and you just select which way you want it to work. You could take this same sort of functionality up one more step by bringing in the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch has the camera remote app, which will actually show you what your iPhone is looking at in real time. That way you can walk away from your iPhone and you can still make sure you're in the shot. It's honestly not quite as customizable as I'd like. For example, if you're in the camera mode on your iPhone, you can't switch it on your Apple Watch. You have to go back to your iPhone and switch it to video. But it is really cool because you can switch it from the rear to front camera and zoom in, and you can do a couple things. Then you can also press record from your Apple Watch as well. Bringing in an iPad is a game changer because it brings things like a bigger display to make editing easier file management, and external SSD support. Now that you have an iPad, you might be interested in Creator Studio, which is Apple's new subscription that costs $12 a month. It gives you Final Cut Pro and Final Cut Pro for iPad, all sorts of different apps made for creating. Final Cut Pro for iPad does have its struggles. It's not as good as the regular Final Cut Pro on the Mac, but there are some things that are really nice. When you go to Final Cut Pro for iPad, you can start a new project, and you can do this two ways, by saving everything to the iPad or saving everything to an SSD. Then it gives you a couple options like finding your video and files, recording from your iPad, or multicam view, which is what we're going to talk about next. This lets you record from multiple different angles and it will stitch them all together so it's super easy to edit later. And this is why it's perfect for a podcast setup. Of course, on an iPad, you want Final Cut Pro for iPad. Then on your phone, you want to get Final Cut Camera. And then these will both work together and it's really cool. Then on your phone, you go to Final Cut Camera, and on your iPad, you click into multi-view and you'll be able to find your iPhone on that view. You'll be able to find any iPhones or iPads that are in the Final Cut Camera app and connected to the same Wi-Fi. So you can have multiple iPhones at once with different angles and it'll all stitch it together really nicely. Then, while you're recording on your iPad, you can plug in a real microphone to your iPad and it will sync everything together perfectly. And just like on the iPhone, if you go into Control Center, you get all sorts of settings. But it doesn't stop there with the iPad, because they've added a bunch of things in iOS 26 like local capture. Basically, you and a friend could FaceTime each other, turn on local capture on both iPads, then it'll save everything in high quality. That way you have high quality video, high quality audio, and 2 different files that you can send to each other. And with that Creator Studio, you also get Pixelmator Pro, which is basically a really high quality image editor, which is obviously great for editing thumbnails. That's what I use, and I'm not that good at it, but it definitely helps to have a better app than just the Photos app or something. Keeping it on budget, you could get something like the new MacBook Neo, which is actually a really good computer for a really good price. This will obviously get you things like the real Final Cut Pro, which is a huge game changer. Edit things and do plugins and all sorts of things that I don't really know how to do, but just like me, you could slowly learn and hopefully get better over time.